Why did Judas Iscariot betray Jesus? By identifying Jesus to the Jewish authorities, Judas set into motion the series of events that became the foundations of the Christian faith. Jesus' arrest, his trial, his death by crucifixion, and eventually his resurrection, known collectively as the Passion of the Christ. Good afternoon, this is Bill DuBois here in Greenville, Texas. I want to thank you for joining me for part 2 of What Do We Know About Jesus. It's not going to be as long as part 1 was, and not as many references. But I will still be reading all the verses, okay? Welcome, and I hope you enjoy the study. Here we go. Luke 22 says that while Jesus was in the Jerusalem Bethlehem area for the Passover, Satan entered into Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12 disciples, and he went to the leading priests and captains of the temple guard to discuss the best ways to betray Jesus to them. That's going to be in Luke chapter 22, verses 2 through 5. Continuing. Assuming that Luke doesn't mean that Satan possessed Judas and overrode his free will, this could be an expression to mean Satan or some of his demons tempted Judas with this particular idea. Scholars with varying opinions about free will and predestinations have suggested many different interpretations of this passage. Now we're going to start in Luke 22, verses 2 through 6. The leading priests and teachers of religious law were actively planning Jesus' murder, but they wanted to kill him without starting a riot, a possibility they greatly feared. Then Satan entered into Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12 disciples, and he went over to the leading priests and captains of the temple guard to discuss the best way to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted that he was ready to help them, and they promised him a reward. So he began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus so they could arrest him quietly when the crowds weren't around, under the cover of darkness. So we know Judas loved money too much, and perhaps he was concerned about Jesus exposing his greed. Beyond that, we don't get any clear descriptions of his motivations. Over the years, different writers have adapted the gospel story in ways they characterize Judas in different ways. Some writers play around with the idea that Judas had a particular idea of what the Messiah should be, and Jesus didn't fit that. That's a thought too, right? Okay. Now let's continue on. Why Jesus was betrayed by Judas. Once one of Jesus' most trusted disciples, Judas became the poster child for treachery and cowardness. From the moment he plants a kiss on Jesus of Nazareth in the garden, Judas Iscariot sealed his own fate to be remembered as history's most famous traitor. Given how little we actually know about him from the Bible, Judas Iscariot remains one of the most important figures in Jesus' story in recent years. The discovery of the long-lost Gospel of Judas, an agnostic text originally dated to the 2nd century, has led some scholars to reconsider his role, and even to ask whether he might have been unfairly blamed for betraying Jesus. I don't know about that one. Who was Judas Iscariot? What we know from the Bible. Also what we don't know, right? And that's the whole idea of this study. Though the Bible offers a few details about Judas' background, all 4 Gospels of the New Testament name him among Jesus' 12 closest disciples or apostles. Judas Iscariot is the only one of the apostles whom the Bible potentially identifies by his town of origin. Interesting, huh? Some scholars have linked his surname Iscariot to It looks like it's Keriot. It's Queriot, or Kereth, Kerioth, a town located south of Jerusalem in Judea. One of the things that might set Judas apart from the rest of Jesus' disciples is that Judas is not from Galilee. Jesus is from the northern part of Israel, or Roman Palestine. But Judas' surname might be evidence that he's from the southern part of the country, meaning he may be a little bit of an outsider. Alternatively, others have suggested that the name Iscariot identified Judas with the Sicarii, Sicarii, or Daggermen, a group of Jewish rebels who opposed the Roman occupation and committed acts of terrorism around 40-50 AD on behalf of their nationalist cause. But there is nothing in the Bible to link Judas to Sicarii, and they were known to be active only after his death. We're not sure Judas was from the south, and we're not sure Judas was a Sicarii. Scholars suggest these are attempts to see if there may have been something up front that set Judas apart from the rest, because people are always trying to explain, why would he have done this? Why would Judas have betrayed Jesus? Possible motives for Judas Iscariot's betrayal. According to the Gospel of John, Jesus informed his disciples during the Last Supper that one of them will betray him. When they asked who it would be, Jesus said, "It is the one to whom I give this piece of bread, when I have dipped it in the dish." He then dipped a piece of bread in a dish and handed it to Judas, identified as the son of Simon Iscariot. After Judas received the piece of bread, Satan entered him. John chapter 13, verses 21 through 27. And that's what we're going to read now. So we're going to read John 13 and start in verse 21. Now Jesus was in great anguish of spirit, and he exclaimed, "The truth is one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at each other, wondering, who could he mean? Who could he mean? One of Jesus' disciples, the one Jesus loved, was sitting next to him at the table. Simon Peter motioned to him to ask who would do this terrible thing. Leaning forward, he asked, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus said, "It is the one to whom I give the bread dipped in sauce." And when he had dipped it, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. As soon as Judas ate the bread, Satan entered into him. Then Jesus told him, "Hurry, do it now." Judas went on his own to the priests of the temple, the religious authorities at the time, and offered to betray Jesus in exchange for money, 30 pieces of silver, as specified in the Gospel of Matthew. We know that 30 pieces of silver from last week is what a slave would cost. And so that tells us that the life of Jesus was worth the amount of a slave. Anyway, like the Gospel of John, the Gospel of Luke also cited Satan's influence rather than mere greed as a reason for Judas' betrayal. John, however, made clear that Judas was an immoral man even before the devil got into him. He kept the common purse, the fund that Jesus and his disciples used for their ministry, and he stole from it. Nice guy, huh? Stealing money from his own group. There have always been those who have wanted to tie Judas' betrayal to the fact that he had a love of money. Others have suggested a more political motive for his treacherous act. According to this theory, Judas might have become disillusioned when Jesus showed little interest in fomenting a rebellion against the Romans and establishing an independent kingdom of Israel. Now, if you remember correctly, the Jews wanted a physical king. Well, they got a spiritual king, because a physical king would have rode into Jerusalem during the Passover with a big army behind him, and a gentle spiritual king came in on a donkey with a few people behind him. So we know what the real intent was. Alternatively, scholars suggest Judas, like the Jewish authorities at the time, could have seen a rebellion as a potentially dangerous for the Jewish people in general, as in the case of the Roman destructions of Sepphoris earlier in the 1st century. Maybe he decided to hand Jesus over in effect to stop larger rebellion, or to stop a larger rebellion. Why did Pontius Pilate have Jesus executed? What happened after that? Whatever his motives, Judas led soldiers to the garden where he identified Jesus by kissing him and calling him Rabbi. That's going to be Mark chapter 14, verse 43 through 46. According to the Gospel of Matthew, Judas immediately regretted his actions and returned the 30 pieces of silver to church authorities, saying, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." When the authorities dismissed him, Judas left the coins on the floor and committed suicide by hanging himself. That's going to be in Matthew chapter 27, verses 2 through 7. So we're going to start reading Mark chapter 14, verse 43. And immediately as he said this, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived with a mob that was armed with swords and clubs. They had been sent out by the leading priests, the teachers of religious law, and the other leaders. Judas had given them a prearranged signal. "You will know which one to arrest when I go over and give him the kiss of greeting. Then you can take him away under guard." As soon as they arrived, Judas walked up to Jesus. "Teacher," he exclaimed, and gave him the kiss. And then the others grabbed Jesus and arrested him. Now we're going to go into Matthew chapter 27, and we're going to start at verse 2. Then they bound him and took him to Pilate, the Roman governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, realized that Jesus had been condemned to die, he was filled with remorse. So he took the 30 pieces of silver back to the leading priests and other leaders. "I have sinned," he declared, "for I have betrayed an innocent man." "What do we care?" they said. "That's your problem. Live with it, right? You made the bed, sleep in it." Then Judas threw the money under the floor of the temple and went out and hanged himself. The leading priests picked up the money. "We can't put it in the temple treasury," they said, "since it is against the law to accept money paid for," you guessed it, murder. After some discussions, they finally decided to buy the potter's field, and they made it into a cemetery for foreigners. The Bible offers different accounts of Judas' death. The Gospel of Matthew describes him hanging himself after realizing the depths of his betrayal. In the book of Acts, Judas didn't kill himself after betraying Jesus. Instead, he went into a field where, falling headlong, he burst asunder in the midst, and all of his bowels gushed out. Acts 15, verses 1 through 8. This spontaneous combustion-like process was a common form of death in the Bible, when God himself caused people's death. When Judas hung himself, most likely with his own girdle cloth, the garment men wore under their outer garments, which would break or tear and allow him to fall from the tree, and causing his insides to gush out, and possibly birds of prey would cause a bit of damage to his body too. Probably a lot more than that. Matthew chapter 25, verses 5 through 8 in Acts tells the money would always be considered to be Judas's, so anything bought with it is blood money, due to his betrayal of Jesus. With all that had happened to Judas, that's going to be in Psalms 69, verses 24 through 28, and Zechariah chapter 11, verses 12 and 13. We're going to start in Acts 1, verse 15. During this time, on a day when about 120 believers were present, Peter stood up and addressed them as follows. "Brothers, it was necessary for the scriptures to be fulfilled concerning Judas, who guided the temple police to arrest Jesus. This was predicted long ago by the Holy Spirit speaking through King David. Judas was one of us, chosen to share in the ministry with us. Judas bought a field with the money he received for his treachery, and falling there, he burst open, spilling out his intestines. The news of his death spread rapidly among all the people of Jerusalem, and they gave the place the Aramaic name of Academia, Akeldama, which means field of blood. I've been messing with my cat down here so he doesn't interfere with me. Peter continued, this was predicted in the book of Psalms, where it says, let his home become desolate with no one living in it. And again, let this position be given to someone else. So now we must choose another man to take Judas's place. It must be someone who has been with us all the time that we were with the Lord Jesus. Now we're going to go into Matthew chapter 27 and start in verse 5. Then Judas threw the money down onto the floor of the temple and went out and hanged himself. The leading priests picked up the money. We can't put it in the temple treasury, they said, since it's against the law to accept money paid for, again, murder. After some discussion, they finally decided to buy the potter's field, and they made it into a cemetery for foreigners. That is why the field is still called the field of blood. Psalm 69, verse 24. Pour out your fury on them with your burning anger. May their homes become desolate and their tents be deserted. To those you have punished at the pain of those that you have hurt. Pile their sins up high and don't let them go free. Erase the names from the book of life. Don't let them be counted among the righteous. Zechariah chapter 11, verse 12. And I said to them, if you like, give me my wages, whatever I am worth, but only if you want to. So they counted 30 pieces of silver. And the Lord said it to me, throw it to the potters. This magnificent sum at which they valued me. So I took the 30 coins and threw them to the potters in the temple of the Lord. Judas' betrayal, of course, led to Jesus' arrest, trial, and death by crucifixion, after which he was resurrected, a sequence of events that, according to Christian tradition, brought salvation to humanity. But the name Judas became synonymous with treachery in various language. And Judas Iscariot would be portrayed in Western art and literature as the Archetpypal, traitor and false friend. That's what I did. I spelt it. I can't pronounce it. I'll spell it. Was Judas really that bad? The most important fact about Judas, apart from his betrayal of Jesus, is his connection with anti-Semitism. Almost since the death of Christ, Judas has been held up by Christians as a symbol of Jews, their supposed deviousness, their lust for money, and other racial vices. The historical tendency to identify Judas with anti-Semitic stereotypes led, after the horrors of the Holocaust, to a reconsideration of this key biblical figure and something of a rehabilitation of his image. What is the gospel of Judas? Now, this is not my opinion. I kept this in my study because to give you the opinion and perspective of the scholars' interpretation of this. So we're going to continue on. Here we go. Professor William Klesson, a Canadian biblical scholar, argued in a 1997 biography of Judas that many of the details of his treachery were invented or exaggerated by early Christian church leaders, especially as the church began to move away from Judaism. In 2006, the National Geographic Society announced the discovery and its translation of a long-lost text known as the Gospel of Judas, believed to have been originally written around AD 150, then copied from Greek to Gothic in the 3rd century. First alluded to the writing is the 2nd century. The Gospel of Judas is one of many ancient texts discovered in recent decades that have been linked to agnostics, a mostly Christian group who were denounced as heretics by early church leaders for their unorthodox spiritual beliefs. Rather than denounce Judas as Jesus' betrayer, the author of the Gospel of Judas glorified him as Jesus' most favored disciple. In this version of events, Jesus asked Judas to betray him to the authorities so that he could be freed from his physical body and fulfilled his destiny of saving humanity. Well, I'm going to, you can't make this stuff up. An ancient Coptic manuscript dating from the 3rd or 4th century containing the only known surviving copy of the Gospel of Judas. Controversy surrounds the Gospel of Judas, as some scholars have argued that the National Geographic Society version represents a mistranslation of the Coptic, that's C-O-P-T-I-C text, and that the public was wrongly made to believe that document portrayed a noble Judas. In any case, the fact that the Gospel of Judas was written at least a century after Jesus and Judas died means that it provides little in the way of historical reliability information about their lives, and certainly doesn't provide the missing link to understanding Judas Iscariot's true motivation. The truth is, we don't really know why Judas did what he did. The interpretation or perception of what the words mean is what makes us think. So I hope, again, you enjoyed the study. I'm looking forward to starting a new study next week. I really don't know what it's going to be. I've been thinking about maybe doing something on the apostles and the disciples or on the apostate church. Okay? So, again, I'll see you next week. You guys stay out of trouble, and I'll catch you on the backside. Bye.